All right, today we are diving into a really unique idea from our source material. It's a specific theological and financial model for giving, and it's called the three-time tithing cycle. The text presents it as a whole new covenant model. So to really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. First, we'll look at the big idea, the core principle. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty rules, who gives and on what. After that, we'll walk through the unique 3-part cycle itself, see exactly where the money is supposed to go, and finally, we'll uncover the ultimate commandment that, according to the source, drives this whole thing. Okay, let's jump right in with Section 1, a new covenant for tithing. What's the fundamental idea here? What is its purpose? So the big idea is this. According to the source, this is not just about collecting money. It's a system that's specifically designed to take these huge, abstract concepts like justice and mercy and faithfulness and make them totally tangible, totally real for people who are poor and in need. And the source material does not pull any punches about how serious this is. I mean, look at the language here. Failing to provide for those in need isn't just framed as an oversight. It's called a deed of robbery against God. That really tells you everything about the moral weight and obligation at the very heart of this model. So how does a principle that big actually work in the real world? Well, that brings us to Section 2, the tithing foundation. This is where we get into the practical, nuts and bolts rules of who participates and exactly what gets tithed. The very first rule is a really crucial one, and the source is crystal clear about it. Tithing is not based on your gross income. That's your total paycheck before anything comes out. Instead, it's calculated only on your net income. That's the money you actually have left after all your tax obligations are fulfilled. The model is also super specific about who's supposed to participate. The duty to tithe falls on workers, basically anyone earning income from their labor. And it explicitly says who does not tithe: the poor, the needy, and students who aren't working. Oh, and one more important detail, loans are not considered income you can tithe on. Okay, so now we get to the real engine of this model. Section 3, the 3-time cycle. Let's walk through this really unique repeating process step by step, because this is where it all comes together. The whole thing is built on a continuous repeating cycle of 3 income events. Let's take a look at what happens at each stage. It's a simple pattern, but with a big twist at the end. Okay, so first income event. The worker gets paid, they set aside their tithe, and they use it for something called a household tithing feast of worship. Basically, a personal, family-level event. And the second income event? Well, it's exactly the same. The worker does it all over again, another household feast. This repetition is really just setting the stage for what comes next, because on the third time, everything changes. Right? Because on that third income event, the pattern breaks completely. This time, there's no personal feast. Instead, the worker's tithe gets pulled together with the tithes from all the other workers. This is that critical moment where the model shifts from being about individual devotion to becoming a collective, community action. And this big pot of pooled money is really the most unique part of this whole system. So in Section 4, we're going to look at the third tithe's mission. What in the world happens to all these collective funds? And wow, the focus here is just undeniable. Take a look at the split. A full 90%, 90, of that collective fund is designated for direct aid to the poor and needy. Only 10% is set aside to support ministers. That allocation right there, it just speaks volumes, doesn't it? So let's start with that smaller piece. That 10% is specifically for what the source calls true ministers of Christ, people who aren't also running businesses. The idea is that this support enables them to focus completely on their ministry, and it's even referred to as the holiest portion of the tithes. But that massive chunk, the 90%, it has a very clear, very hands-on mission. It has to be invested directly into projects that provide for the most basic human needs. We're talking food and water for the hungry, shelter for the homeless, support for the helpless with things like clothing or education, and care for the most vulnerable, like the sick and those in prison. But here's what might be the most radical part of this entire model. Who is in charge of this massive aid fund? The source is absolutely explicit about this. It is not the ministers. The responsibility for distributing that 90% falls directly to the workers themselves. The people who give the money are the same people who distribute it. And all of this brings us to our final section, which really ties it all together. Section 5, the ultimate commandment, we're going to look at the deep theological why behind this entire financial structure. And here it is. This is the ultimate why. The source frames this whole tithing cycle as something much bigger than just a financial guideline or a nice charity program. It's presented as the required fulfillment of what it calls God's most essential command, to love. The source material really grounds this idea in Scripture, pointing to verses just like this one from 1 John. The argument is that love isn't supposed to be something you just talk about. It has to be something you actually do. It's about actions and in truth. And so this financial system is positioned as a direct, practical way to answer that call. And you see it again here in Galatians. The source uses this to argue that the real measure of your faith isn't about ceremony or just what you say you believe. The only thing that really counts is faith expressing itself through love. And in this model, that tangible expression is the act of providing for people in need. In fact, the source takes it a step further. It argues that this specific cycle is the number one way for a believer to show love for God and for their neighbor. It's positioned not just as a good option among many, but as the primary commanded method. And that really brings us to our final thought for today. What we've just walked through is a system that structurally hardwires a person's financial life to their stated beliefs, all through community-managed aid. Which leaves us with a pretty big question. If you design a financial model to directly link faith with tangible aid like this, how does that change the relationship between belief, money, and our responsibility to our community? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.